You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, all of you listeners, and we love our counts. We're in 80 countries, all 50 U.S. states, and I think more than 1,600 cities. We're super grateful for all of you. And guess who we have with us here today? So let me give you a little clue. It's 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time, the United States, but we're talking to a brilliant author who's speaking to us tomorrow at 6 a.m. Yes, you got it right. We're talking to an author from Australia, and we're thrilled to have Benjamin Stevenson here with us. Welcome, Benjamin.
Hi from the future, I guess.
Yes. Now, I got to tell our listeners a little bit about you because I really do love your background. Now, Benjamin Stevenson is an award-winning stand-up comedian and an author, of course. That's why he's here. His books have gotten some really great accolades. They've been shortlisted in places like the Ned Kelly Award, the Best Debut Crime Fiction, the International Writers Award for the Best Original Paperback. He has starred reviews from Kirkus Weekly and Kirkus Reviews and Publishers Weekly. That's a lot that he's got going. His more recent book that you may be familiar with, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, was named as one of the Sunday Times best crime novels of 2022. And Benjamin, do I see this right? It's going to be adapted into a major HBO TV series?
Yes, yeah.
Congratulations. That's really phenomenal. We're here to talk to him today about this book. Everyone on this train is suspect. And I've got to quote a friend of BOOKSTORM, Nita Prose. She's been on our show. We love her writing. Nita says it best when she says, this book is devilishly good fun. Yep, Nita, we couldn't agree more. Can't wait to dive down deep with Benjamin Stevenson. Welcome.
Great intro. Thank you. A lot to live up to.
Well, Benjamin, we always give our listeners just a little bit of the background of what's going on with the story. So if you'll allow me, I'll do a quick summary. And of course, we're here to talk about Everyone on This Train is a Suspect. And this story has been described as kind of a modern rendition of an Agatha Christie model or a novel. And it is. And because of that, we can't give away a lot of information because we don't want to give away any spoilers. So I promise not to do that. Now, in the story, it's written in the first person as if the author is Ernie, one of our characters that we meet. And the Australian Mystery Writer Society invites him to a crime writing festival aboard the Gone, the famous train that is between Darwin and Adelaide. Now, he was hoping for some inspiration for his second book. His first one was immensely popular. And, in the first one, though, it was written because his family experienced some significant trauma. So he was hoping to avoid the trauma on the train, but have the inspiration for writing a new novel. Now, on board the train, this is a who's who of novelists. So we have the debut writer, and that's Ernie. And we have a few others. We have a forensic science writer. We have a blockbuster best-selling writer. We have a legal thriller writer. We have a literary writer and a psychological suspense writer. Now, on the train, of course, we know that somebody's going to get murdered in an Agatha Christie type model or novel. And the problem is all of these writers love to be detectives, and all of them also should know how to commit a crime. Did you want to add anything to that background?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, the basic concept of the book is that 6 writers get on a train together. One of them dies, 5 of them become detectives, and 2 of them will leave in handcuffs. So that's the plot of the book is, who's the perfect murder? A crime writer. Who's the perfect murderer, I should say. I spend all day sitting at my computer Googling ways to kill people. And I was trying to write this book, and you try and pick who will be, your perfect kind of plot or your killer. And I'm sitting there Googling all these methods of murder. And in the first book, there's a serial killer called the Black Tongue, and he murders people with an ancient Persian torture technique. And so, I'm always trying to think of fun things to do and ways to off people. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, who is the perfect killer for this new book? And I'm just like, well, me. So I decided to put 6 people like me on a train and see if they would really kill one another and spin the mystery out from there. So that's the whole thing.
I just hope you're not doing your research at a public cafe as you're researching ways to kill people.
No, definitely not. Although I'm fairly confident I'll be on some kind of internet watch list somewhere. I don't know. I don't really know how that works, but sometimes I Google things and I'm like, surely that's gonna, ding somewhere in some office.
Oh, yeah. In the US, you'd be on the FBI most watched list, and I think all writers would. But we're grateful you're doing all this Googling because we're having a lot of fun with all these different ways to commit murder. I got to say to our listeners, I really love this book. And if I had not known you were a comedian, I would have guessed it. It's witty, clever, tongue in cheek, loved everything about it. We stepped outside the story now and then with the narrator, and I love this line. Everyone's suspect, Juliet asks Ernie. Aren't you even a suspect, Ern? He answers, well, no, I'm the narrator. I laughed right out loud at that. I thought, you brought the reader into more than just a mystery. You showed us the mind of an author, the plotting, the character building, the tension. And as you said, and I'm going to quote, this comes up a lot in the book, the rules. Could you explain as the author to all of us, and especially the reader, what are the rules in writing a good mystery? And what happens when the author breaks those rules?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, my books are murder mysteries that are homages to the golden age of mystery fiction, which is kind of the 1930s, those kind of classic detective stories. So it's a little bit after Sherlock Holmes, but right into kind of the Agatha Christie and the Poirots. And the thing about the golden age is they're very structured. And they've got, as you say, the rules for what we call a fair play mystery. And a fair play mystery does exactly that. It plays fair with the reader. It's about being open and allied with the reader so that they can solve the crime alongside you. Now, modern crime fiction starts to kind of move away from that and into psychological suspense became really big. And then after things like Gone Girl and Go on a Train, then we start looking at the unreliable narrator. And the genre sort of moved towards fooling the reader rather than surprising the reader, which is great. And those books are fantastic. But we had moved away from the fair play mysteries. But I was really fascinated by trying to do a fair play mystery in the modern context because we are in that kind of fooling kind of era instead of playing fair. And so I found these rules that had been written in the 1930s by a guy named Ronald Knox, and it's called the 10 Commandments of Detective Fiction. And they're all the kind of guidelines that you need to follow to play fair with a mystery. And Knox was part of this group that called the Detection Club, which would hang out with, Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers. They would all get together and they would have lunch and drinks, and they would talk about how to write mysteries, and they would come up with these kind of fair play rules. And so the rules are very intuitive. They're all the stuff that if you were reading a book and it happened, you would feel cheated by the writer. So things like surprise identical twins that haven't been fairly introduced, that's a big no-no. Supernatural elements, that's a big no-no. And that's because these things can come into a murder mystery where you're trying to solve the case, and they subvert the expectations of the narrative in a way that the reader can't see coming. But yeah, so, and basically just being upfront and open. And one of them is that the detective needs to share everything that they see with the reader. And that is key for me. And that's why I wrote Ernie the way he is, because he is somebody that loves Golden Age mystery fiction. And he's found himself inside real life murder mysteries. And he starts to think, well, if I've read so much Holmes and Poirot, can I implement what I've seen them do in the books and try and follow these rules? So he's obsessed with following the rules of a fair mystery. But the thing is, he's solving, in his world, real life murders. And real life murderers don't always play fair with poor Ern. So there's a lot of fun in that as well. But yeah, the rules of writing mystery fiction is all about, we're a team, the reader and the author. I'm not trying to trick you. I hope that I will surprise you and that whoever the killer is will be a reveal that makes you gasp. But we are a team. I'm giving you every single clue that you need to solve the mystery. And Ernest's job is to hold your hand, basically, and help you solve the puzzle. Even in this book, and, you know, I don't mind talking about things that come later in the book. This is something Ernest does as well. He kind of chats you through, oh, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. Right before the final chapter, the book stops and Ernest says, have you solved it? This is your last chance. I'm about to. I'll also say for readers, you know, if you're not the type of reader that wants to kind of go along with the book and think about all of the clues and you just want to let it wash over you and take you on a roller coaster, don't worry. Ernest solves it for you. That's his job. That's another rule, is that everything must be wrapped up by the narrator. So yeah, that's how I apply those rules.
Well, the reader's grateful because we believe readers are smart and we want to solve this crime. There's nothing worse than in the 11th hour, here comes a brand new character out of the woodwork. Like you said, an identical twin or a ghost that we didn't suspect. There's nothing worse. And I loved the way that you said, the narrator said, I'm purposely mentioning the killer's name 106 times. You are absolutely going to know this killer. And I laughed right out loud at that. Were you poking a little fun at the rules?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I want to use them as a structural basis, but I never think a rule should get in the way of the generation of suspense, tension, or mystery. You know, they're the most important things. So I'm making technical choices to build the book the best that I can, trying to respect these rules. But, you know, they're rules that were made up by a bunch of authors 100 years ago. And it's fascinating. Even then, you know, Ronald Knox anecdotally supposedly wrote a couple of these rules specifically to rub in Agatha Christie's face that she had broken several of them. So, you know, they're not firm rules, and nobody could say, oh, well, Agatha Christie broke that rule and so therefore her books aren't any good. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So you just kind of, I do try not to break them, but I'm nudging at them and I'm winking at them. And, you know, those kind of elements of playing along, like Ernest does say how many times the killer's name will be mentioned in my first book. Ernest gives you the page number that every murder happens. So you can flick through the book and you can skip through and check them if you want to solve the mystery earlier. But you can't control F the characters' names in a Kindle version. You won't get 106 because this is a murder mystery novel. Not everyone's who they say they are. You've got to add some things together. You've got to subtract some things in order to get the counts right. So yes, it seems like I'm telling you everything and breaking the rules, but I'm still giving you a puzzle to solve, and you have to figure out that puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Loved it. Thank you.
Yeah. And in so doing, still following the rules while you're poking fun at them. So I thought that was very clever. Chris and I have been talking about that aspect of it. We loved it. I wanted to ask you, you know, your story featured writers at different stages of their career, but all of them seem to wrestle with insecurities. You know, they were wondering, you know, will my next book be a success? Who's going to endorse it? Am I a poser? Is this a one-hit wonder that I had? And I wanted to ask you, do creatives suffer with this affliction of insecurity more than others? And if so, why?
Yeah, I can't say if we suffer it more than others. I hope well, not hope, that's a grim thing, but I think everybody does to some degree. But I certainly think, with a book, you spend a year in a room by yourself, building this narrative, living with these characters, and really kind of putting all of you on a plate for someone else to devour, and you just hope they like it. And I think that hope translates as imposter syndrome, almost always in almost every writer I meet. There's kind of those elements where you just think, oh, I can't do it anymore, or do I belong here, or it's kind of equally matched with the kind of marvel of the brilliant things that are happening and the excitement that people are reading your books and enjoying them, is matched with all of this for me. That's so strange. And I think Ernest he was a good funnel for that imposter syndrome, because he survived the events of the first book, and he feels guilty. Not only does he feel like he might not be as prestigious or as award-winning or as good a writer as some of the other writers on the train in this book, but he's also feeling the imposter syndrome because he doesn't know why he got to live through everything that some of his family died in the first book. So he's kind of got the natural metaphor for my own writerly concerns. But the thing about writers is that we're all, I think we've all got that kind of that imposter syndrome, but we've all got, and I mean this in the nicest way, all creatives do, because it's how you create kind of great art. There's always some ego in there, and ego in a good way. You need to kind of believe in yourself to kind of get things across the line, and create them and champion them. And as I say, you're putting everything out there, and so there's some fragility to that. And really what I wanted to do with this book was just elevate all of that stuff and see if it might be worth killing for. So, the things that authors may have that kind of imposter syndrome moment about, or that kind of doubt, or that ego, things like, as you say, getting a cover blurb endorsement, or, getting a 1-star Goodreads review, or, all these kind of things, or the next book deal, or all those kind of things. What's worth killing after? Would somebody kill someone over a 1-star Goodreads review? And that's why I put everyone in a room and thought, I'm going to figure out if they would. And that I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, you kind of pulled back the curtain a little bit, but while doing so, expose those deeper emotions that do fuel people crossing the line into criminality and taking the life of someone else. So that was really interesting. There's a lot of depth to this book, and you see it as you're peeling back those layers. It's very, very good.
Okay, so now I know you work at Curtis Brown with a lot of authors. Is that right?
Actually, not anymore. I was a literary agent, and I'd been at Curtis Brown for 8.5 years, and I just packed that in to write full time.
Okay,
But I really love working with other authors. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm going to test my theory on you then. Now, of course, now
Okay.
let me tell for our listeners, Curtis Brown is a very big literary agency, both in Manhattan and around the world. And so this book made me think of it. We're talking about art forms and creative people. And now somebody may not be happy about this, probably some college professors who are teaching creative literature, creative writing. Can writing really be taught? Can it, or does it have to be a natural instinct that can be fine-tuned? I think of it a lot like painting, like sculpting, photography, any kind of art form. I have this theory that it can't really be taught. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very tricky technique. Can be taught, and skill sets can be grown through teaching. Voice and passion can't be taught. Neither of those is enough on its own. So you can't, well, no, I shouldn't say you can't, because anyone can do anything. It would be difficult to write a book with voice and passion alone, with no technical skill. and it would be difficult to write a book that's technically perfect with no voice. So I don't think you can teach it down to kind of a finite, I'll teach you how to write a book. I just think there's always a glimmer of something that's already going to be in you. But also, actually, now that I kind of talk about it, it's not something that's going to be in you. It's something that you've got to teach yourself. So reading a lot, loving storytelling, all those kind of things, they do teach you. So I guess it does teach you and develop in that way. But in terms of like going to a course and learning how to write a book, you might get all the technical beats to write the on paper perfect novel, but it's so hard to describe, isn't it? That feeling, I think, can elude you.
I'm thank you for that. That's a great clarification, because even with all these authors that are on the train, we see their motivation for writing and feel it to be a lot different. And it's interesting as they compare their work to each other, especially this character McTavish, who's quite full of himself. I don't want to give any more spoilers, but he's like the prestigious author in the group that everyone wants to emulate, and everyone wants to be his friend. And I thought how real life that is too.
Yeah, he's the kind of blockbuster author that's had the huge success, and everyone, Ernest is really excited to meet him, and maybe he's not all he's cracked up to be on the page. But I had a lot of fun playing with all of the different types of authors. I mean, the 6 writers on the train serve a very distinct plot purpose in that they all write a different type of crime fiction, so that when the murder happens, they've all got the different skill sets with which I can sort of Power Ranger them together into one Sherlock Holmes as they try to solve the crime. So the bloke that writes forensic thrillers is able to kind of look at the autopsy, very tongue-in-cheek, imagine a crime writer putting their hand up and say, oh, I write books about, medical crimes. I watch CSI, I'll do the autopsy. But that's exactly the joke of the book. And, then the lady who writes the psychological suspense novels, she goes, I'll profile the suspects for you because I'm an expert in that. But they're also, so they serve a plot function, but they're also very different writers. They're also at very different levels of their career. I mean, one of my favorite characters in the book is Wolfgang, who he's a literary writer, and he's very pompous, and he sort of doesn't view himself as part of the crime writing community in that he thinks he's better than that. And he admonishes Ernest, the narrator, aka me, for being a bad writer. And Ernest says, well, what's the difference between good writing and bad writing? And Wolfgang says, you use too many adverbs. And then just as a little joke for me is that most of Wolfgang's dialogue is tagged with an adverb, just to kind of stuff with him there. So it's all this kind of fun little in-jokes about publishing and writers, while also making sure, I mean, everything, I'm digressing from the kind of the point you made, but everything in the book must build the mystery. So if I'm sending up an element of publishing, or I'm playing with a writer, or I'm doing some comedy or whatever, it all has to contribute to the mystery. So I'll never trade off a point I'm trying to make for plot and enjoyment of that core mystery. But all 6 of those writers do play those roles, and I got to have a lot of fun with it while building the mystery between them.
It's a great cast of characters.
Benj, I want to ask you about the impact of trauma on our lives. Some of your characters had experienced some very significant violence or violations of personal security, and it impacted them on every level, including creatively. Do you think that writers write partly to process some of that emotional upheaval, or can it also be a block to our creativity?
Yeah, I think it's both. And I think the characters in the book, different ones express it different ways, and that was really interesting to me, because their motives, in a murder mystery, their motives are important. And so, you're looking at characters who sort of, this book is about what you can put into words. What is a book, and what does a writer leave behind, and what is their legacy? And the books inside this book that the authors are writing. They take various forms, and there's people who can't say what they want to say, and there's people who, are possibly saying more than they should in their writing. And so I think every book is a confession of sorts. I think all of my books, as kind of, fun and snappy and murder mystery and nothing like my real life are, they're always a little bit of a confession about what I'm thinking about at the time and what is going through an author's head. So that can be very hard to get on the page, but it can also be very energizing to get on the page as well. So I think it kind of goes, I think it goes both ways. But definitely I tried to explore both versions in this book with what the writers face.
Yeah, and I think a lot of readers may process some of their own emotions through characters and through seeing how those characters respond to situations or don't respond. And some people do it through writing. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it. But I loved that you explored that in different ways, because everybody here did react a little differently to, certain traumas in their experience and in their lives. And we had one writer, for example, who didn't write a book for a long time. And there was a long processing period there. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to try and, the book is structured, as we said before, I'm taking that kind of ego element of writers and seeing what might be worth killing for it, and there's kind of, dare I say, kind of silly or vain reasons, but then there's a whole lot of stuff going on the train that's more personal and more kind of horrific in some ways for many of the characters. But there are those tenets of the murder mystery as well. It's not enough to just have, this person's book sells better than mine, so I'm going to kill them. It's all of them
Right.
need to have kind of really concerted motives and developments. But trauma is an interesting thing because, and one of the things I want to do with Ernest and his trauma, arguably, surviving a serial killer who picked off half his family is not, in the context of the book, Ernest kind of wears it a little lightly than some of the others, considering what's happened to him. But I was very interested in, these golden age mysteries. The detectives, they kind of pick up and start again every time there's a new mystery. They just kind of, it's a new puzzle for them to solve. And so one of the things that happens to Ernest is that imposter syndrome, that survivor's guilt, that kind of flows through into this book for him. And he kind of reflects on this. He's like, well, why am I so upset by all of this? Miss Marple doesn't have nightmares. And I was interested in the world of the books, Ernest is a real person. So how would you go from case to case as a detective? You wouldn't be quite so Teflon to the emotional damage that it causes as someone like Sherlock Holmes, who can just go, a new case, the game's afoot, and straight on. Ernest has to grapple with that. I'm making it sound very dour, but it's also a rollicking, fun adventure. So, you kind of put it in where you can.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was something
absolutely.
I'm very interested in exploring.
Well, and you're right. This book is a lot of fun because you're thinking on several levels at once, all of them entertaining. And we really, really appreciate your insights on the story, but also even on the publishing industry, the mind of an author. That has been fascinating. And before we let you go, we're wondering if you can share what's on your radar, what's coming up next for you.
Oh yeah, totally. Ernest is coming back. One of the things I want to do with these books is play around with the genres and the conventions and think about what kind of scenario Ernest can find himself in, and how many more murders can one poor guy find himself wrapped up in and tasked to solve, and he can find himself in another one. So the next thing I'm going to be playing with, the first book was very much guy that loves mystery novels finds himself in a real life mystery. The second book was very much a sequel that sort of looks at the impact of sequels and what a sequel kind of is, and how, as we said, imposter survivors guild, but also Ernest kind of coming through with the follow-up. He's very aware in this book that he's writing a sequel. He sort of says, well, here are the rules of a sequel kind of thing. So this next book that I'm working on is playing with the concept of a holiday special. So Ernest is looking at murder mysteries set at Christmas time, and he's thinking, well, this is what usually happens at a Christmas set murder mystery, and he sort of gets tied up in a case around the holidays, and has a very complex set of murders to solve. It's another impossible kind of locked room mystery for him to dive into. And yeah, that's for this Christmas. So I don't know if I'm allowed to or supposed to talk about it, but I've done it. So yeah, good.
Well, that sounds fantastic. It almost sounds like you are developing a genre of your own. And this is very intriguing. So we cannot wait to read that book. We hope you'll come back on our show. And I'd like to tell our listeners how to connect with you. You've got a website, it's benjaminstevensonauthor.com, and that's with a V. So when you search for his name, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. And we have just enjoyed talking with you so much. We hope you come back, and thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
Well, it's really nice of you to get up at 6 a.m. to talk to BOOKSTORM, and we're pretty excited about that. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Kristen, this book was hysterically funny. I knew he was a comedian, but yet you're right. There's some very deep, heartfelt issues going on here too, and personality traits. I really did like your question, and I have to ask you more about using writing, or let's take it a step further and say any art form, to process emotional upheaval. I kind of think you're onto something there. And I wonder if that's what every artist does. Are artists deep thinkers, deep feelers?
Yeah, I think that people, first of all, in acting or in writing, you are tapping into some of those deep emotional reserves. And if you haven't had experience, if you haven't loved and lost, it's very hard to tap into that and portray something that moves people. Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do is move people and have them think and be invested in what you're doing or saying. So I think it's a very important way of processing emotion, but it's also a reflection of real life. And that's what people are identifying with.
I like that.
So,
And what did you think about this character, McTavish? I couldn't expand upon him too much more, but I thought it was very interesting how people gravitate to a certain film or song or book or Broadway musical or any art form, and or let's say restaurant. We could take this handbag, and people begin to say it's the best, and everyone falls in line and agrees it's the best. And sometimes I wonder, are we being very subjective? Are we following the crowd? Are we thinking, yes, it's the best, so we've got to go for it? Like this McTavish was this big famous author, and we knew we had some skepticism about him. And it led me to believe, as art forms, can we really say that anything is the best? Is there an objective way to really measure a song or a novel? Or is it really truly subjective? Here's another tough question. I'm full of a lot of tough questions today.
yeah, I think that's a great question because, in this book, everyone on this train is a suspect. He was playing around with that idea of what does a technically perfect mystery look like, and broke those rules, but in breaking those rules also conformed to some of those rules. And so I love this idea of, what makes something great. Is it conforming to the rules? Is it breaking the rules? Is it maybe both? But that's the point. It's something subjective that speaks to us because ultimately a book can be technically perfect. And, we may say to each other, it didn't speak to me in any
Yeah.
respect.
Or could
And
it be? I always look at these award seasons, and
yeah,
people win the Emmys and the Grammys, and there's other people sitting there who've been nominated who don't win, and I think,
yeah.
why did they not win? There is no cut and dry answer. And it doesn't always mean that the other one is the best. It's what we feel at the moment to be the best, maybe because of our culture at the time.
or what's going on in the world at the time, the story that we need or the music that we need. There's so much going into it. It's just sort of interesting to think of it that way. If you are not the winner, you kind of have to sit back and say, okay, but I came this far. I actually wrote a book. I wrote a book. Wow. I wrote a song. I wrote a song? Wow. I mean, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. We wait to be the best. We wait to win the award. Sometimes it's good, a big enough of an accomplishment to have just done the thing.
Oh, I agree. And I want to go back to something you said too. You and I read a lot of books, and there's a lot of books that we don't have on the show that are very popular, but for whatever reason we decided, you know what, we're not going to go in this direction. And that really goes to show you there is that subjective element. There is that element of what's going on in our lives at the time or in the world at the time. And we even see that in the literary world where a bunch of books will come out that have kind of a similar look and feel to it. And they're tapping into something that people want to see. And, Benjamin referred to that. He was talking about how there's this wave right now of books where, the idea is to fool you as the reader. And that to me is fascinating because we have art reflecting some things going on in real life and vice versa. So I think that's one of the reasons why books are so cool because we've got something that we can process through. We can look at how these characters are dealing with these real life issues, but also it reflects what's happening at the time in society, which is
I like that answer because think of 100 years ago or 200 years ago, the music that was popular, the books that were popular, the plays that were popular, because they were in a different place and had different needs. I like that we are needing something that's being fulfilled. And that's the trend. And that's the buzz. I like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just might be fickle though. Don't you think? Like I'm thinking now of designer handbags. Like, oh, why do we have to have this one bag the world's willing to pay thousands of dollars? Maybe that's just, I don't know. That's a whole nother conversation for our Bookstorm fashion episode.
What would that be? Book clothes. I don't know. We'll have to come up with something. Anyway, well, we are so excited about the authors that we have coming up. In addition to Benjamin today, of course, I want to go through a list because this is quite the tour de force here. We have Ashley Elston, we have Wabgisha Rice, Liza Palmer, Lisa Unger, Heather Gudenkoff, CJ Box, Benjamin Stevenson, of course, today. We have Kate Quinn, Janie Chang, Mary Kubica, Christopher Reich, Emiko Jean, Bonnie Jo Campbell, J.D. Barker, Dervla McTiernan, Scott Carson, who also writes as Michael Carita, Kate White, Lisa Wingate, B.A. Paris, Hank Philippi Ryan, Ramona Ossibel, and Jill Shelvis. What a lineup. We cannot wait. And thank you, listeners. You are sharing our socials. We appreciate it so much. We want you to keep tuning in. Find us on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and podcast. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, on TikTok. And until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.